Hello, and welcome to my Art History 375 final project presentation on ideological images when graphic art becomes propaganda. So today we're going to look at 5 different Soviet propaganda posters and study how graphic art relates to propaganda. So as we go through these images, there's going to be, again, 5 of them. The first one is from World War II. 2 of them are extolling the virtues and values of socialism and life in the Soviet Union. And then the final 2 are vilifying and decrying the West and what was seen as American imperialism and aggression to the rest of the world. So as we go through these images, think about how things are portrayed in them. Think about whether the information is true or not. Is it whitewashed or exaggerated? Are complex issues just glossed over? And think also about the emotional impact that this would have on the viewer. Is the poster showing that there's a clear right and wrong side of an issue? Is it specifically designed to inspire pride or nationalism or to provoke outrage? And what would be the implications of disagreeing with this? If this is the ideology that's presented, does it invite discussion or does it enforce a standard? So our first image here is from World War II. This is an anti-Nazi poster from 1942. The translation at the bottom is "Death to the German occupiers," and the red flag that's flown above the Soviet tank says "Forward to the West." The really interesting thing about this image to me is the very detailed caricatures of the Nazi leaders. So of course the overall image is a crushing Soviet victory over the Nazi German invaders. We can see details here such as the broken, twisted war equipment that the tank is driving over as it bears down on the Nazi leaders. The really interesting thing, again, is the specific detail to these leaders. So we're going to focus on 3 of the ones down in the front. Obviously, Hitler is the most readily recognized figure. And if you'll notice, his right hand is dripping with blood, just symbolic of the destruction that he's wrought all across Europe. A bit to the right of him is sort of a monkey rat-like creature, and this seems to be a depiction of Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels had polio as a child, and so he had a deformed foot, and one leg was a few inches longer than the other. So he always walked with a limp. That's something that he tried to hide in his life, but that's something that apparently the Soviet propagandists knew and were able to capitalize on. And then to the far right, we see Hermann Goering. He's depicted as grossly overweight and with an excessive amount of medals on his chest. You can actually see there's a few spots in the snow behind him where the medals have fallen off as he's running from the tank. Again, this is an exaggerated depiction of him. He was a hefty person based on historical photos, and he did wear a significant amount of medals on his chest in a number of official photographs. This is just an interesting depiction of how specific characteristics of someone can be exaggerated to really emphasize difference between an us and them in this. And the cultural context for this as well is that in 1942 was the first major Soviet victory against the Nazi invasion. So they had successfully pushed back an assault against Moscow. And propaganda at the time would have been focused on rallying support for this, to continue the war effort and keep pushing the Nazi invaders back. Our next poster is, and this is again going thematically, we're not going chronologically here, it's from 1929, a poster glorifying socialism and the proletariat over the vilified forces of capitalism and imperialism, represented by the 2 figures at the bottom. So here we see, here we see a very larger-than-life proletariat in the middle of the image. He's striding forward and holding a large blazing torch overhead. Written in Russian letters above or behind the torch is Komintern, which is the abbreviation for a political party that Lenin founded. It was intended to spread communism and socialism to other nations and engender a worldwide revolution of communism. And you can see the 2 caricatures underneath that he's almost kind of pushing aside as he steps through. So there's a capitalist on the right, which is a caricatured image, and this is a trope that you're going to see fairly often in other forms of propaganda from the Soviet Union, where the capitalist is wearing a tuxedo and a top hat and very overweight, and is also near or holding bags of money. Three very stereotypical tropes that are used often in communist propaganda or Soviet propaganda to denote capitalists or the West. We also see to the left what looks like an imperial soldier. This would have been only 12 years after the revolution, when Tsarist Russia and the Russian Empire was defeated. So that still would not have been that too far in the past. It would have been in recent memory of most of the viewers who were seeing this poster as adults. So this poster is a prime example of how Soviet propaganda artists depicted their own ideology in stark contrast to the West, or any figures of opposition to it. Proletariats, Soviet soldiers, and leading figures in communism are always portrayed as larger than life and very brave and strong, while of course capitalists or imperialists are depicted as weak or fat or cowardly. And perhaps the most obvious self-congratulatory touch in the poster is the fact that in the background behind the proletariat, you see a bustling, bright city marked USSR, or SSSR in Russian. And it also has the bright sort of sun above that. Does read 12 years of October, which is a nod to the 12 years that have passed since the Communist Revolution. So the artist behind this poster is sending a clear message to the viewer. Communism is on the rise and burning bright, so either join in success or fall by the wayside and into darkness. And we have another example of Soviet propaganda, extolling the successes of communism. So from the late 1950s through the 60s, there was a prime new source of material for propagandists, which was the space race, because there were many Soviet successes initially in the space race. And so this poster specifically is celebrating Sputnik 5, which was the first launch of mammals, so two dogs named Belka and Strelka, into orbit and their safe return to Earth, which paved the way for Gagarin later. So the text here for this poster reads, "The way is open for man," or for humanity. So we can see that there's still some communist propaganda tropes here. The person who's catching the rocket in his arms looks an awful lot like the large, brave proletariat from the last poster. This is not some scientist or a leading political figure. The message here is that this is a socialist achievement. All of us together as a nation have done this and have achieved this. So it's not credited to any one particular person. It is to the nation in general. And Soviet art in this era was not necessarily only inspired by political ends. There's an author who explains that there was a lot of excitement about the possibilities of space exploration in this era. And so that was also the inspiration for much of this art. It did serve an ideological purpose, but it also did have a lot of meaning and came from just a place of excitement and exploration from the Soviet side as well. So now we come to the section of decrying the West, the section of the posters. So this is a really interesting one to me. This is one of my favorites for the message that it's sent. The translation of this is on the mustache, says American policy, and then reflected in the sunglasses, on the left, it says domestic, or it's literally internal, but this would be vnutrenia politika would be domestic politics, and then the same thing for the right lens. Внешняя politika is foreign, or outside, literally outside policy. So what we see here is, again, on the left, there are 5 policemen in riot gear who are beating a black man. And on the right, we see 4 armed soldiers standing over a presumably dead person as they're just laying there with no signs of life as the horizon behind them burns. So given that this poster is from 1970, it seems that this is clearly on the left calling out the outsized and aggressive response to clamp down against activism and protests for the civil rights movement. And on the right, this is in the middle of the Vietnam War, and atrocities such as the My Lai massacre had happened just a few years before this. So this is likely calling out the fact that even if you have a comfortable life in the West, it's built on oppression not only of your neighbors and the other citizens of the world, but of your own American citizens as well. So this was a reminder to Soviet citizens that, during this time, rumors were starting to trickle in of the comforts and conveniences of just everyday middle-class life in the West. And some citizens may have felt, that they wanted a part of that. Why can't we have that here? And so this sort of propaganda really does emphasize the message that even if that does exist outside the Iron Curtain, it's built on the suffering of others. And so just, again, as a subtle reminder that the Soviet or socialist way of life is superior to Western capitalism. And this is our final poster. This is, again, decrying the evils of the West. And this one is focused on barriers to education. So the translation, I've went ahead and enlarged this because it's very fine print in the original poster. It basically says learning is light, and if you aspire to light, strive for money first. Like, if you want an education, if you want that light for yourself, you'd better come with some money. So propagandists were calling attention to social issues such as inequality in education to really emphasize the difference between socialist and capitalist societies. I find it really interesting here that the position of the two figures. So the man is there at the gates sort of jumping back as if he was about to go up the steps, and the gates just shut on him, denying him entry because he did not have the fee for education, as it says on the placard right next to the gate. And especially interesting as well is the black woman to his left. It doesn't seem that she's even tried to go up the steps. She's just looking longingly up at that bright, warm, inviting door. It may be that she's not even tried, or that she's just given up on trying, knowing that she will never be granted admission to a university, much less be able to afford it. Whereas in the Soviet Union, their constitution guaranteed things like free healthcare, free education, and equal rights for all citizens, regardless of their race or gender. So these were things that the Soviet propagandists were able to capitalize on to really emphasize the difference and ultimately, in their view, the superiority of capitalist and society, of communist society and socialism over the capitalist West. So I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. This is the list of works cited, images of all of the images that I've gotten of the posters themselves, as well as references to some of the interpretation for it. Thank you so much for your attention.